What if there was one thing you could do to elevate your leadership and the way you manage people? Well, as a human resources leader of over 25 years, I believe there is something you can do, and that is the topic of today's episode. We're going to talk about the importance of an effective one-on-one conversation with your employee, and we're also going to talk about the way to do that. So after I've observed and really taught people how to do effective one-on-ones for so many years, I've realized that this is the topic that will change the way you lead if you do it right. So I'm going to jump in and tell you all about it. So one of the things that happens for me as a human resources leader is that people come to me and they'll say, I have an employee who's not performing. And in this situation, there was a guy who was a leader in our organization. His name was Brian. And he came in my office one day and sat down and seemed super frustrated. And he said, Mindy, I am trying so hard to connect with Tiffany, one of his employees. And he said, I just can't. I think she has potential. I'm not really seeing it. It's not that she isn't trying, but I'm just not really getting the quality of work that I would love to get out of her. She seemed so much better when I hired her, right? And so, as a human resources leader, I'm trained to kind of ask a lot of questions, peel back the layers, and kind of figure out what's really going on. And after talking to Brian for a while, I realized that what was happening was they weren't connecting. They weren't setting aside time each week to level set, to ensure that Tiffany knew exactly what the expectations were, and also time for Tiffany to ask questions and to really clarify that she knew how to do her job. And so this is really the case of the missing one-on-one conversation. I've found over the years that this is actually the root of so many performance problems, lack of communication. And so I really just want to talk to you about how we can fix that pretty simply without spending a lot of money and in a way that increases employee engagement. We know that when one-on-one meetings are done regularly and done right, they build trust, they improve communication, and they provide a consistent space for coaching feedback and alignment. And that is so important for someone to succeed. I'm going to continue talking about Brian and Tiffany and their working relationship as I go on in this episode. But let's start by really understanding why one-on-one meetings are so important. We know that they build trust, that they improve communication, that they give a space for coaching and feedback, actually two-way feedback. And we also know that when they're done well, they increase employee engagement. They reduce turnover and they drive better performance for the team. And so let's look at some of the stats around that. It's real easy to say that they increase engagement, but Gallup has actually studied this. Gallup has shown that employees who have one-on-one meetings regularly with their manager are 3 times more engaged in their work. And this is actually huge because another stat that Gallup tells us is that the employee engagement globally and in the US is at an all-time low. So one-on-ones are one of the best ways to increase employee engagement. And again, 3 times more likely that the employee is engaged when we take the time to do a one-on-one with them. When right, one-on-one meetings can improve 5 different things. So I want to go over them and ensure that we talk about them because the art of the one-on-one and this really effective tool depends on us understanding the why behind it. The first thing that we know is it builds trust and relationship, not just trust in someone's work, but trust that the leader is going to show up when they say they're going to, and that time is protected to foster that relationship and that two-way communication. Also note that it just increases the psychological safety of an employee when people have an opportunity to feel heard, supported, and seen. So the first reason is, again, to build trust. And in the situation with Brian and Tiffany, they weren't having regular one-on-one meetings. And so it was like two ships passing in the night. Sure, he would stop by her office or her cubicle and say, hey, how are things going? Everything okay? But that doesn't replace a one-on-one. That's more like just a pass by versus a dedicated time to talk. The second reason why they're so important is because they boost engagement and retention. Like I said, 3 times more likely to be engaged in their work when they have quality communication with their boss. These consistent check-ins help catch issues early. So way before anyone is frustrated, the leader, like in Brian's case, or Tiffany's. When people don't have that communication, their frustration builds and they start to kind of imagine, he was imagining she wasn't performing when really she just needed more support, more clarity, and more direction. And so a one-on-one can fix that. The next reason why they're so important is because they do clarify those expectations and priorities. When an employee is working on what they think is important, but maybe it doesn't align with what you think is important, that is a miss. And so a regular set aside day and time for communication enables everybody to be on the same page. And we all know in the business world, and whether you're in a restaurant or office or a retail store, it doesn't matter where you are, things change and things change fast. And so when we have no communication or really spread out one-on-ones, we can miss that time to level set to make sure that we're working on the right priorities. All right, next is it creates space for coaching and growth. We know that employees who feel like their manager cares about them and cares about their development stay longer. It reduces turnover, and it's actually one of the main things that employees are looking for in the workplace today. They're looking for an employer who will invest in their development because they want to learn and grow. Training and development is one of the very best retention strategies. And it enables you to do that in a one-on-one. It enables you to talk about someone's growth, and it's a prime opportunity to give feedback, recognize wins, and also just talk about career aspirations. When an employee knows that their supervisor cares about their career and knows what they're aspiring to do, they are more committed. And the last reason why it matters is because it drives team and organizational performance. When somebody is confused about what they're supposed to be doing, it affects the whole team. When someone is unsure if they're meeting their supervisor's expectation, it affects performance. So we can get ahead of this by having regular one-on-ones so that everybody knows what performance looks like, what good looks like, and they know how to achieve it. These are super important reasons why we need to set aside time for one-on-ones. So taking you back to my story about Brian and Tiffany, when we really peeled back the onion and figured out what was happening, we realized they just weren't communicating. Tiffany was feeling like she wasn't really getting the attention of her boss, and so she was doing the very best she could, but clearly not meeting Brian's expectations. And Brian was thinking, I feel like we trained her in the beginning. She should be performing. And so his frustration just grew and grew. Well, in that situation, again, it's like a clear miss, right? They're not actually on the same page. And the number one thing that can improve that is communication. So let's talk about the 3 C's that make effective one-on-ones. The first thing is consistency. I see it over and over again. Leaders have great intention, and so they'll do a one-on-one and they'll schedule it, and then they're like, we're going to do these weekly and we're never going to miss them. And then something happens, whether it be a business urgency, or it could be somebody's child is sick or someone's on vacation. And now all of a sudden, the consistency has been broken. And it's really hard to get back in the swing of it when you're out of the habit. So the best thing you can do with a one-on-one is to establish consistency. And when something happens, like an emergency in the business or emergency in someone's personal life where they couldn't actually meet, reschedule it right away. Make sure that both people know how important it is and that maybe they need to shorten it, or maybe they need to schedule it again for the next day. If we skip one-on-ones altogether, we get out of the habit, and that really disrupts the rhythm. So the first lesson in effective one-on-ones, the first C, is all about consistency. Schedule it, stick to it, and that also helps your employee to know that it is important to you. The next thing is the content. So what do you talk about in a one-on-one? Sometimes people will say to me, gosh, Mindy, weekly, that feels like a lot. And I mean, you could stretch it to bi-weekly, but it's really important to keep that consistency and not have it too spread out. Imagine if you just did it once a month and then something happened and you didn't have that one-on-one and now it's 2 months goes by. I really recommend it's either weekly or bi-weekly. It can't hurt to have it more frequently and maybe just to have a shorter meeting if you feel that you've covered everything. But let's talk about content. So it is very important that the meeting is not all the manager talking. This is actually really driven by the employee. Both people, the employee and the supervisor, should keep a shared list of topics that they want to talk about. Best practice is to actually open up the invite and take notes in the invite. So as an employee, you can go in there before the meeting, list your questions, your ideas, anything you want to talk about, your wins, just capture it right there in the actual meeting, in the actual meeting invite. And then supervisor, you do the same thing. As you're going along, open up the meeting invite, add some notes there of things you want to talk about in your next one-on-one. This reduces surprises and also makes sure that both people are contributing to the agenda, that it's not just a top-down communication. So keep that running list of things that you both want to talk to each other about and get in the practice of creating a shared agenda. Technology makes this really easy, like I said, with being able to take notes in the invite, but you could also share a Google Doc or a Notion board. There are so many ways to have a shared agenda. Make sure that it's shared, not just the supervisor talking to the employee about what they need, but actually a 50-50 or even better, 70-30 mix. The employee should be doing the majority of the talking. All right, the last C in an effective one-on-one is connection. It's so important to start your one-on-one with connection. And really, I like to call this a well-being check. We know that employees have so many things going on at home. They could have a sick child. They could have a child who's struggling in school. They could have a sick pet. They could be moving and have just a lot of extra things on their plate. There's so many things that people deal with outside of work. And so the first step in a one-on-one is to establish connection and make sure you do that well-being check. I'm actually going to give you some ideas of sample open-ended questions to do this, but really you're just asking them, how are they? How are things going? What's your stress level? Is there anything stressing you out lately that you want to share with me? Or even say things like, what wins have you had that you want to talk about? Let's start by celebrating. So there's a lot of things you can do to establish professional connection with someone, to build that relationship, to foster trust, and make sure the employee feels seen and heard. So the 3 C's of effective one-on-ones are consistency, content, and connection. And when you get those things right, you are going to have a successful meeting. I've mentioned a few pitfalls that can happen during one-on-one meetings and communication between a boss and an employee, but let's recap them all in one list. So the first one, like I mentioned, skipping or just frequently rescheduling them, that is a signal to the employee that they're not as important as something else that you're doing. So we all know that things come up, and if you have to skip it, make sure you are rescheduling with intention and not just letting time go by. The next pitfall is when the boss talks the majority of the time. Effective one-on-ones really are when the employee talks the majority of the time. Let's just say like 70-30. We miss the opportunity to build trust. So don't talk the majority of the time. If you're the leader, make sure that you are a great listener. Next, it's failing to write down or follow up with what you guys agreed on. In the same way that you have a shared agenda, you can write in that same spot what you agreed on for deadlines, for priorities, and you have just a running record of what you both agreed on. Having a shared agenda and a shared list of things that you agreed on helps you not only hold your employees accountable, but it also gives them a roadmap to success. And so oftentimes people come to me as leaders frustrated because their employee is missing the mark, but we haven't, as leaders, documented what success looks like. So this is such a common pitfall in one-on-ones, and I just encourage you to keep, as you keep a running agenda, also keep a running list of things you agreed on and priorities. And last but not least, a pitfall is ignoring that growth and development. You have this time set aside with your employees, so make it a regular part of the agenda that you're asking them what they want to work on, what challenges they'd like to have, and where they see themselves in the future. Training and development, again, is something that builds retention. To wrap up this episode, I want to give you a few final thoughts. First of all, the most important conversations are the ones that you have regularly. I want to give you a final glimpse into my conversation with Brian about his working relationship with Tiffany. When he started realizing that the issue was more about communication than it was about Tiffany's performance, he started implementing effective one-on-ones. And over time, and it didn't even take very long, Tiffany turned out to be an excellent performer. What was frustrating him was fixed by an increase of communication that focused on a listening environment where he could hear what Tiffany needed, what she had as far as questions went, and what she needed from him as a supervisor. So this can happen for you too. If you are feeling a disconnect with an employee in your organization, implement effective one-on-ones and you will see a difference almost immediately. We know that the most important conversations are the ones that we take the time to have regularly. They don't need to be perfect. Supervisors just need to be present. Make your one-on-ones a habit, not a reaction to poor performance. When it's a reaction, we have missed the opportunity to have an engaged employee and elevated performance all along. So show up with consistency, curiosity, and care for your employees, and they will do excellent work. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a big favor and leave me a review. This helps my podcast be seen by more people so we can build better workplaces. If this piqued your curiosity and you would like to bring effective one-on-ones to your organization, just send me a DM on LinkedIn. I would love to facilitate training for your team, either in person or virtually. And last but not least, I have a new freebie for people who want to elevate the people side of the business, and that is a document called the People Success Playbook. Click the link in the show notes and download your free copy of the playbook today. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next episode.